Morning everyone, Hardware Thrift here, and today I'm bringing you a video on how to choose the correct power supply for your system. So when it comes to picking a power supply, especially if you're a new or beginner builder of PCs, is trying to pick the right power supply for the components you're putting in your computer. It's very easy to just overkill and do like 750 or 850 watts for the components you're putting in. Or you can take a little time, do a little bit of math, and get that sweet spot and save yourself a little bit of money at the same time by picking the right power supply for your components. So the first thing I do when I look for a new power supply when I'm building a computer is I follow the 80% rule. And the 80% rule tells me that the total system consumption is less than or equal to 80% of the rated power. So what that means is whenever you have a power supply on it somewhere, so this one has it on there, it will say what your maximum output power is. And for this power supply, I don't know if you can see it, but it has a maximum rated power of 300 watts. So that is 100% of your rated power. So what you want to do is you want to find 80% of that rated power, and that is now what you want to be shooting for your total consumption of your components. So with this one, 80% of the total rated power would be 240. So the total consumption of my components I'm putting into my new computer should not exceed 240 watts. So now with that, I kind of want to run an example of how this would work if I were building a new computer with some average parts that you would find when building a new computer. So with our new build that we're going to be doing, I'm going to put a GTX 1070 in there. I want an i5 8400, just a generic motherboard that can support those, 2x8 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM, and I would like an SSD for all of my storage. So with all of those components, they'll draw a certain amount of power from that power supply. So you want your power supply to be rated somewhere above the total draw from these components. Now, I have certain wattages written by these components also because I already did some research beforehand to figure out what the total draw of these will be, so I can do some calculations. One of the places you can look is whenever you Google or look up a part, you can look up, let's say, i5 8400 power draw. And so what this will bring you to is what we're looking at right now is the Intel Arc website, and it will show all the specifications of this CPU, including the 65 watt average power draw it has. So now what we're going to look at, since we found all these wattages, we want to total them up, and that will be our total system power. So starting with the GTX 1070, that will be drawing 150 watts. Our i5 will be drawing 65 watts. Our generic motherboard, we went a little high on just to give a little room for play, and we said that'll be drawing 100 watts. Our RAM 2x8 gigabytes is 16 watts, and our SSD that we'll be putting in is a measly 6 watts. So if we add that all together, that gives us a total system wattage of 437 watts. So now we want to find a power supply that has an 80% rated power that meets this 437 watts. So what I will be looking at is a 550 watt minimum power supply to feed that 437 watts, because 80% of that rated 150 watts will give us 440 watts, which is less than or greater than or equal to that total wattage of our system. So we'll be safe using that. I also online, I'll link it in the description below, there is a chart that will show you, depending on what your total power draw of your system is, what power supply you should be looking for to reach that 80%, and I'll link that below. The reason why we want to use this 80% and not 100% of our power supply is that your fluctuation in your components can vary greatly. So that 65 watts on that i5 8400, that is the average. But let's say you're overclocking it or you're putting through a strenuous game, that can jump up 80 watts, 90 watts, even more depending on what you're doing with it. And that fluctuation can push you over the edge. So if your total system power is 500 and you say, okay, I'm going to get a 500 watt power supply, if you push that system past those limits, you can cause burnouts in your component. And that's why we want to stick with the 80% rule. Some other things now, jumping into buying a power supply other than just what your power consumption is looking at that GTX 1070 we have, you have to look at the connectors that are coming with that power supply. That GTX 1070 takes a single 8-pin power connector to power it. So that means you still need to find a power supply that will support that 8-pin connector. While that is great, some GPUs also take 2 6-pins, some will take 1 6-pin, some will take none at all. So you have to take that into account before buying your new power supply. Also with that, depending on the ATX, if you have an ATX, a mini ITX case, that can change what kind of motherboard or what kind of power supply you'll want to be using with your computer. And so that can actually change the literal size of that power supply, because the mini ITX ones usually are smaller to fit into that small form factor. And the last one you want to look at, and this is more of a novelty depending on how you like your wire management, is non-modular, semi-modular, or fully modular power supplies. This difference is pretty simple on that. If we look at this old Dell power supply I took out of a computer, this is what you would call a non-modular power supply. Because you have all the cables, they are connected directly into the power supply unit, and none of them are interchangeable because they're all locked in and terminated inside that power supply. With a semi-modular power supply, like what you're seeing on the screen right now, you have some of the cables that can actually be pulled out and removed or replaced in that actual power supply, allowing you to customize it to fit what you have in your case. And then a fully modular power supply is when every single cable can be disconnected, can be traded out, can be added, can be removed. And this is more of a hobbyist kind of thing because it allows you to take out the cables you don't need, clearing up space in the case, or you can replace those cables with different types of sleeved cables from third-party vendors that are just more appealing to look at than what you have. So, I hope you found this video helpful in finding your new power supply. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos, and I'll see you next time.